Welcome you all from wherever you are in the world today to our webinar. It's my pleasure to welcome you really on behalf of the journal as a whole, Frontiers in Systems Biology. I'm Yoram Vodovots. I'm the field chief editor, and I'm based at the University of Pittsburgh. And it'll be my pleasure today to host a wide-ranging panel discussion with the field chief, or the specialty chief editors in our journal. As I'm sure you're well aware, research in biology and biomedicine is tackling incredibly complex questions, more so than ever before, and now really spanning into areas that involve, especially in the context of systems biology, the technology fields, AI, et cetera, and also many questions related to ethics and other major concerns. Our goal here at Frontiers in Systems Biology is to address all this complexity head on in an integrated and interdisciplinary fashion, really trying to get the broader community to come out of silos in many different levels and to come together to solve these big problems. Our journal is comprised of 9 sections currently, and our aim really is to showcase that today. And so to start, I'm just going to go around and ask my fellow panelists to introduce themselves. I'll just go kind of in the order that's on my screen. Maybe Ruriko, could you go first?
Hi, this is Ruriko Yoshida. I'm a professor at the OA department at Naval Postgraduate School, and I'm a statistician, and I've been applying, basically developing statistical machine learning models for evolutionary biology. So I'm section chief editor for evolutionary systems biology.
Thanks, Ruriko. Eric, could you please go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Chang. I'm the editor for Integrative Systems Neuroscience, and I'm an associate professor at the Feinstein Institutes at Northwell Health in New York. And our research in the lab revolves around bioelectronic medicine, bioengineering, and neuroimmunology, which are fields that are very cross-disciplinary by nature. And I think one of the reasons that systems biology is interesting to me is that it could benefit. While we have a lot of data in each of these fields, we're missing kind of some first principles understandings of maybe how the nervous system and immune system interact. So, taking some learning from, engineering or control systems, I think will help us in that understanding, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Eric. Shane, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Shane Pierce-Kotler. I'm professor and department chair of biomedical engineering at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. I lead the section on multi-scale mechanistic modeling, and my lab uses agent-based modeling as a framework to develop multi-scale mechanistic models to study small blood vessel growth and remodeling. And one of my passions is doing STEM outreach for K through 12 students. So in this country, that's elementary school, middle school, high school students, and using agent-based modeling as a way to engage them in biology and medicine.
Thanks so much, Shane. Umar?
Hi guys, my name is Umar Dishan Ijaz. I work as a reader in information engineering at University of Glasgow. I lead the section on integrative systems microbiology, and for the past 12 years, I've been working on applying numerical ecology and machine learning principles for understanding microbial ecology of both natural and engineered system, with a bit of focus on software development.
Wonderful. Sean, could you please go next?
Yes, hello, Sean Mannion. I am co-lead with Dr. Lovejoy of Systems Concepts, Theory, and Policy in Biology and Medicine. And I am the Chief Scientific Officer at AI Mind Systems Foundation, where we're focused on patient sovereign data and patient sovereign AI as a goal for improving precision medicine and improving research. Great to be here.
Wonderful. Jennifer, maybe you could go next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm co-editor with Sean of the Systems Concepts Theory and Policy in Biology and Medicine. I'm affiliate faculty at the Institute for Systems Biology in Seattle, and I am a chief science officer for Phenome Health, which is a nonprofit research organization founded by Dr. Lee Hood that is looking at doing large-scale genomic phenomic studies. And probably for about the past 10 years, I've been doing integrated multi-omic studies with a goal of scientific wellness and bringing personalized medicine to the forefront, breaking down silos. So it's great to be here.
Wonderful. Eduardo, could you go next?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending where you are. I'm Eduardo. I'm the chief specialty editor for the section Data and Model Integration. I am associate professor in the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands, and my research revolves about the application and the development of a statistical tool, mostly multivariate tool for the analysis and the integration of large data set. Especially this in the context of system and synthetic biology. We try to mine information from the top down, and then we try in our group to integrate them with the bottom up, and with mechanistic modeling to arrive at a more complex, complete vision or understanding of different biological systems from bacterial to humans.
Wonderful. Harinder, could you introduce yourself next?
Yes, I'm Harinder Singh. I'm director of a Center for Systems Immunology at the University of Pittsburgh, and overseeing the section within the journal that has contributions in systems and synthetic immunology. My own interests lie in the analysis of gene regulatory networks that control the development and functioning of cells of the immune system, and really at heart, it's a matter of how information processing is regulated within these systems that enable them to execute important functions.
Wonderful. Gary, could you go next?
Hi, my name is Gary Ahn. I'm a practicing trauma critical care physician at the University of Vermont, where I'm the vice chair of surgical research. I am a co-section editor in the section of translational systems biology and in silico trials. My particular interest at the moment is integrating multi-scale mechanistic simulation models with artificial intelligence to create digital twins as per the National Academy's foundational research gaps definition.
Wonderful, Gary. And then last but certainly not least, Giannis.
Yeah, thank you all. Very nice to meet you. I'm Yannis Androulakis. I'm a faculty in the Biomedical Engineering Department at Rutgers University, along with Gary. I'm also involved in the translational systems biology and in silico trial branch of the journal. By training, I'm a kind of a system dynamics person and high performance computing, and since I have a lot of interest in what I like to call like emergent dynamics for the past almost 20 years, I've been involved in various aspects of systems biology, systems pharmacology, and more recently for the past 5-10 years, I've been very heavily involved in the kind of emergent behaviors driven by circadian and seasonal rhythms in physiology and their implications in health and disease. And I'm really glad to have the opportunity to meet all of you.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I should say it's been a terrific pleasure for me to have interacted with all of you as the journal has grown. We're now in our third anniversary. We launched in the midst of the pandemic, where I think a lot of us, and hopefully, and I think people in this audience or whoever will see this video eventually on YouTube, it probably will resonate with them that this was probably an unprecedented period of coming together, right? I think people putting aside some of their traditional either silos and boundaries or some of their areas where they were not comfortable to kind of dive in and try to make a difference. Hopefully, as terrible as that pandemic has been, and obviously it's now just sort of seemingly transitioning towards an endemic phase. Hopefully that has led us to a place where everyone's kind of more open to the idea of integrating across boundaries and across silos. And we've already heard some of that in your presentations as you've introduced yourselves. And I think it's wonderful to hear. So I'd like to throw out as a starter sort of a point for discussion, kind of how do you envision the future of systems biology in terms of these integrated approaches? Is integration the future? Is it about development of lots of new methods or lots of new thought processes, or both?
So I think the key is that most people who have studied something realize there's something just on the edge of what they study that is probably relevant to what they study. And I think a more global view of how these systems interact as they translate up towards being able to take care of patients, which is to a certain degree the ultimate goal here, would allow the breaking down of silos, the appreciation of different complementary methods, and other areas of study and foster collaborations.
That's terrific. Before we jump to Yannis for a follow-up, I see that Rongling Wu, our one editor that I had not introduced before, was able to get on a little bit later. I don't know, Rongling, if you can give a quick introduction to yourself, or we can just introduce you later in the webinar.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. Just you have hard time to get online. I'm Rounding Wu. I'm a professor in statistics and genetics. I'm section editor for integrative genetics and genomics, and I'm looking forward to work with you and other colleagues. Okay.
Thank you, Rongling. So Yannis, you had a follow-up. We're discussing, Rongling, this whole question of integration, which is a core pillar for us here at the journal. Yannis, you had some thoughts?
Sorry. Yeah, so I just wanted to comment on something which may or may not be kind of along the lines we're discussing, but I think at some point we'll have to face it. One of the, and I'm very often thinking about that, as being also an educator. I think one of the interesting things that will happen in the very near future is that the boundaries between the different disciplines are going to become less and less well defined. So the big question is, who's going to be doing that? What should their background be? What do they bring to the table? Because, a few years back, it was a little bit more clear. Like you had a biologist, you had a modeler, one who's talking to the other. But now I think we're getting to the point where the model itself is the result of the research. Whereas in the past, it used to be very much like biology oriented. So like, the biologist owned everything more or less. I hope I'm not offending anyone. And then, you're trying to model it, but now we realize that the model itself is the research. So I think that kind of brings a very interesting point. Again, as I said, from an educator's point of view is, do we need like a new breed of people? What do we do? I don't know. This is more like a question for me.
No, I think I want to circle back to that exact point. But in the meantime, Edo, I think you were next.
Yes, I'm perfectly aligned with what Yannis was saying, and doing a lot of teaching myself and teaching quantitative methods to a lot of to biology students. I really see that we can break the silos if we actually invest in training a complete sort of scientist. So where there is no more really a distinction between the student that goes in the lab and the student that like to stay behind the computer. I also see from the project that now we are designing the sort of PhD candidate that we are looking for. We are looking more and more with students that can have both expertise, or not 50-50, but maybe 30-70. So I think that would be probably the real revolution. And if I may add a comment, I remember once the Dean of Education of Georgetown University commenting during a meeting on systems medicine that they envisaged that every doctor in the near future should be able to program in at least one programming language before graduating. So I don't know if this is really a far-fetched vision, but I tend to agree. That will be also our biologists, between quotes, should be able to program in at least one programming language.
Eric, I think you were next.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm all in favor, and I think it's definitely going to be true that there'll be a new breed of scientists, biologists, computational science, like, you know, the new, hopefully, you know, people are getting their PhDs now or training now are going to see that you can't just approach it with us, you know, just staying within one field. From the aspect of neuroscience, I mean, we know, you know, these complex emergent properties such as complex behaviors or consciousness, you know, people are trying to understand it, but, you know, there's, you can't really understand it with only neuroscience tools. And, you know, like that's starting to come to the public forum with BCIs and Neuralink and all these companies trying to get into human brains and interface with them. And I think we're just, you know, taking some of the tools from systems biology and other disciplines is, I think, just going to help us tackle these extremely complex problems.
Yeah, and in fact, obviously, computational neuroscience is a field that has really been one of the earliest ones to apply computational modeling to derive new knowledge. Harinder, maybe representing the immune system, which has been the other major system that has had computational input for a long time.
True, and extraordinary interplay and connectedness between the immune system and the nervous system. You know, two of the most extraordinary systems that can process all kinds of information from their environments. I wanted to expand on what you touched on, and I think what Giannis mentioned as well. I think we're at a point of extraordinary creative tension in modern biology. And I say that because on the one hand, we've made extraordinary progress using a reductionist framework and even expanding on it in the best way possible when it comes to analyzing more complex systems using agent-based models, for example. But even there, I think we run up against very strong limitations when it comes to dealing with the complexity that biological systems present. And so now on the other side, we have AI, which is suited to analyze extraordinary complexity, absent the kind of reductionist mechanisms. It doesn't insist on those to begin with. And it's able to discern, you know, extraordinary patterns that have great predictive power, but actually lack any kind of explanation of the kind that we've, you know, we embrace as scientists. So the tension I think that we are in right now are these sort of two differing ways of probing biological reality. And I quite frankly don't know where we'll end up. It's just an extraordinary time. It's very exciting and certainly important to have a journal that I think will be squarely facing this as we go forward.
Yeah, very well stated. Jennifer, I think maybe you were next.
Yeah, well, as if biological complexity wasn't enough, I want to add another layer as we're thinking broadly and as we like to do in the journal that I helped to co-lead here. And that, you know, so I'm a physiological psychologist by background. I didn't mention that when I was doing my introduction, but so I've done behavioral science, I've done work on the exposome, and so, and really clinical research for over 20 years now. And when we are talking about humans, when we're talking about systems medicine or systems biology research in humans, in addition to looking at the complex systems within the biological organism, we also have to consider behavior. We have to consider the environment. And in systems medicine, we also have to consider the regulatory environment, which is frankly one of the biggest hurdles to implementing personalized and systems medicine in the clinic. And so I think, you know, taking that broad perspective is essential for moving us forward in this field. And, you know, there are going to be barriers. So I do think I agree with, you know, that some of the barriers in biology are breaking down, the boundaries are breaking down, as was said earlier. I'm not sure we're seeing that quite as much in medicine, and I'm not sure we're seeing it quite so much as we look at the interface between the practice of medicine and the regulatory systems and other systems that oversee that. So I do think that is a frontier that we are just on the cusp of, but it's going to be essential to bring that all together, including human behavior and the environment, as we start to look at these patterns.
Yeah, no, very well said. And for our audience, especially, we've just recently had another webinar led by Jennifer and also with Sean, dealing specifically with some of these aspects of the exposed zone. Ruriko, I think you were next.
Hi. Yeah, so like Edo and Harinder, they are talking about the AI and so on. So just to kind of like, since I'm working on like heavily like machine learning and also like statistical learning side, yeah, I think that that's really exciting like field right now, at least for me. But at the same time, I think that like I think that's really important to know that, especially for someone who are using those methodology for like, biology or at least evolutionary biology, is that like you have to actually know like limitation of the method. And because like so many students, I have a bunch of students, but sometimes they don't know what's the like assumptions or what's the concept, like what's the each model is doing. But if you don't know what it's doing, they have to put something, but like it might not be garbage. So you have to be careful when you are applying. Even though like AI is so popular right now, like everyone talks about AI and application to AI. But yeah, I think just like, those methods are actually right now, because of the computational time, computers and so on developed. So it's much faster and it does like great job. But those foundations are there for a long time. So that means that like, you have to actually know those background, how the methods are doing. So, but at the same time, for student, I really feel like, especially that, I think it was talking about like at least learning some languages. I do think that like even like I worked with a bunch of biologists and biology students, and I really recommend at least they should know some languages. And I think that's really great benefit for them. So anyway, so that's kind of my comment.
Yeah, no, these are all very, very good points, and I'd like to circle back in a little bit to touch on a few of them specifically. But first, I just kind of want to get more of our panel's input. Umer, I think you had something to say.
Yeah, so I'll talk about changes in the recent years in terms of microbiology, because um, the data analytical techniques they got popularized quite late, and that was mainly because it is tied with the advancements in next generation sequencing technologies. So only after 2007 we were able to rely more on DNA based techniques to decipher microbial communities there. And as the field is progressing, there is more and more emphasis on data analytics as opposed to wet lab culture-based microbiology. And also in the past few years, maybe 5 or 6 years, there is more emphasis on data integration by consolidating different omics technologies together. So not only studying microbiome by itself, but also integrating metabolomics and transcriptomics and other kind of omics technologies. The other thing is that there's a lot of data that is being deposited in public repository these days. So also in the past maybe 5 or 6 years, there are plethora of publications that are now on meta-analysis utilizing that data. And I think that is where system biology can play an active role to mine so much data that is available there. Essentially, we are now heading towards everything is going to be digital. So it's digital chemistry, digital biology. Eventually, integration of all of these modalities will act as a filler where individual fields lack something. So I believe that through the help of all of these integrative approaches, um, we should be able to gain a better mechanistic understanding. So one last comment would be that also in the past few years, there's a lot more emphasis on exposome, particularly in field of microbiology. So now you do not only want to study the microbiome, you also want to study the environment, the clinical settings and physicochemical parameters. So there's a lot of potential for system biology to enhance our understanding of these systems.
Yeah, very well said. Definitely the idea, the possibility that a lot of experimentation that we often see where papers sometimes appear to republish things that we've all seen previously might transition over to the use of data that comes out of repositories to hopefully drive some clearer hypotheses or to fill in gaps or just see a translational value. We can maybe come back to that as well. Sean.
Yes, I think many great points have been made. I think one of the things that I would like us to look at too is really looking at how to integrate at the levels of the systems of science. I mean, we have, education on one side that's training scientists that by necessity for funding purposes and through education gets extremely specialized to the point of reductionism in the biological and biomedical systems. On the other hand, there's a lot of advances in the computational technologies in the business side of things that for similar purposes of incentives, product market fit need to become very specialized to just something that can get sold and make revenue now. And there's less and less how do we integrate all these systems at the technology and science level, not just within the biological systems but integrate at the systems of science level. And I think that's something that the journal as a whole, and then the systems concepts section that Jennifer and I lead can really allow people to focus on and allow people to start to explore, because it's been I think it was Harinder said, it's been an amazing advance in recent decades, but we're getting to the point of we're missing that tying together of those things at many different levels.
Yeah, and as you know, I mean, I felt very strongly that if we are to really try to move forward on this idea of integration, it would behoove us to have to get past the typical fragmentation that often that is the hallmark of a lot of what we do, and especially even the journals that we deal with that have sections, right? So sections inherently create division, and I was as part of the vision that I kind of pitched to Frontiers when taking this leadership role on, was not to eliminate the sections, but rather to use the sections as a mechanism to bring people and concepts and approaches together. And in order to do that, I felt like we needed a section like the one Jennifer and you lead, because I think if we don't continuously at least think about and debate what does it mean to be doing systems work, then and leaving it kind of for the audience to figure out, the readership, based on the compendium of papers that they read, then I think we're not really living up to the full potential of what the journal can do. And hopefully we can come back to that in a little bit in the context of educating the next generation. But first, Shane, I think you had put your hand up.
Oh yeah, thank you, Yoram. I just wanted to go back to what Umar said a little while ago. This notion of data, right? Like we hadn't been talking about data yet, but the field of systems biology, it's never been richer or more necessary because of this data explosion. We keep saying we're amidst a data explosion. Every time we turn around, there's a new omics approach, and those are adding new dimensionality to the data, like spatial transcriptomics. Now we have the spatial information And so, it's like the opportunity is huge. And I think the need to go beyond data analysis, right, which is step one, to actually data integration and then extracting understanding from that data is taking it, to a different level where our field, I think, is primed to make a contribution. We already have the Food and Drug Administration in our country, for example, is requiring computational models for approving medical devices in certain realms. You can imagine a day in the not too distant future when we conduct our wet lab experiments on the bench where there's literally a digital twin of the experiment that we're doing. So every dish of cells, for example, has its own computational model backing it up, trying to extract even more information and put it together to build the knowledge base. So I just wanted to add the part about data and that the future, I think, is really bright.
Yeah, and as I said, in the context of educating the next generation, this brings up the very question of is the current body of trainees or even more senior folks really ready for that, or do we need to be thinking actively about how to manage that transition? Gary, you were next.
So I'd like to go back to something Ruriko said, because this affects how we train people. It's because it's very easy to become enamored with the latest technology. And I think one of the key aspects of systems biology is recognizing the limitations of our particular tool. I mean, we're all enamored with our own methods. We're trained in those sorts of things. We love those things, but we need to recognize what they can or cannot do. And identifying what they can't do allows for opportunities for collaboration with people outside a particular field.
No, that's a very succinct, and I fully agree with that. A longstanding, you can think of it as a debate or an internal debate has been: do we lead by saying these are the problems that need to be solved, or are we led by these are the methods that have emerged, right? And if we stop and think about it, we can probably recall in our own trajectories and careers moments where we led based on an idea that we thought about and then found the technique, and moments where someone or some entity showed up with the technique and the data set and asked us to take it from there. And we may want to think about how we dealt with those situations, and thinking also about how to train a generation of that's coming in this new world. Edo, you're next.
Yes, I had a comment about the data and this unprecedented access to data. It's from what I see, from how I see it, but it's a sort of blessing in disguise, because it's really a case of the more we want to know and the less we know. Because as I tell also to students, I remember that the biological part of interest is a very limited part of the data that you have measured. And when we start to adding a layer of data on top of that, I remember starting doing my PhD at the dawn of metabolomics, and that was a really big revolution. And then zillion of other omics layer come, and then we have this multi-omics data set, and then we don't know how to handle. And then we started adding, as Shane said, the spatial components and the spatial dimension. And this really create very big challenges, really from a practical point of view. It's just how we store the data, how we access the data, how we interrogate those data. So they are all things that actually we need to train the students and the biologists on how to deal with the data from a really technical point of view. We cannot store anymore this stuff on Excel file, for instance.
Right. So let's take a step back. So if we can think about this, trying to spot check or think about individual issues, which themselves are huge. The role of AI now, as we've been discussing, the role of the data and the methodologies, et cetera. But why don't we take, let's say, to use the old statement of ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Let's think about the development process of a scientist, right? And in our case, I think a systems biologist, but we could maybe make the case that as we move forward, every biologist is going to be a systems biologist. I mean, that may be a provocative statement, but I tend to believe it. So the question is, what comes first, right? Is it the question or the need? Is it the training so that you can identify what the question is or the need is? And then if we get past that, then it's also the question of it's the issue of how is it that we convert the need or the thought into a question, which is an appropriate abstraction. And Gary Smith, who's in the audience, put that up in the Q&A. What is the right level of abstraction? So if we think about it like that, can you think about a way of stating what you in your mind would be sort of a vision for how you would guide a trainee through this, right? Are you trying to get them to understand how to ask a question, which is probably the classical scientific approach that well predates systems? Although I should say scientists that predated us were much more generalist in their training than the reductionism that emerged over the last, say, 40 years. And so arguably their thought process in framing a question was already a systems-based thought process. But we can put that aside or think about it. But so if you're going to guide someone through, and now with all of these considerations, there's what to focus on, there's all these possibilities of methods, there's all these possibilities of data. Maybe you don't even think about data. Maybe you just think about, I want to run computational simulations to qualitatively try to understand things. Yeah, and your own thoughts, maybe Shane, you talked about training and how important that is. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I would just say, it's iterative, right? Like, and I think kids these days, they're more capable than we were, certainly, or at least than I was. And they come to us with these skill sets. So I have 3 high school students in my lab this summer. Every single one of them knows Java, Python. They taught themselves NetLogo in an afternoon, and they're often running with the computational part. It's the higher level thinking, I think, where our expertise can be helpful in guiding them to know how to, find the important questions, drill them down, collect the data, do more than what an AI could do if you just, asked an AI to build an agent-based model, for example.
Do you find that these students, are further facile with the, latest iteration of large language models, et cetera, et cetera? Are they coming in from the point of view of using those kind of tools, or are they coming in with curiosity and then discussing with you, or you give them ideas about what to look at, and then they go and use the tools?
More of the latter, actually. I've been surprised at the amount of natural skepticism that these kids are coming to the lab with. Maybe it's the teachers and the schools are terrifying them. But yeah, I think it's more the latter. Yeah.
That's very interesting to hear. Giannis, I think you had your hand up because you also brought up some of the education issues earlier.
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to raise as a concern is that sometimes I get a little bit worried when I see us kind of skipping a lot of the fundamentals just to run and use, the convolutional neural network or the autoencoder and so on. And then you realize that the people who actually use it and preach about it, have no idea what optimization is, have no idea, how the billions of parameters that ChatGPT is using were actually determined. So that's something that concerns me a little bit, because now again, I was amazed to realize that my GPS is using the relativity theory to make sure that it adjusts my location. Of course, I have no idea, what Einstein said, but I'm still using it. So the things that I just want to make sure that at least the people who are in the field, I don't expect them to become an optimization expert, but they should have some appreciation of the fundamentals. I find it impossible for someone to develop a very complex model and having no idea what a differential equation is. and what rank kata does and whether it converges or not. So that's just, but I realized the problem, and you know, again, going back as educator, we face that, especially in BME, where you know we have to bring in all, you know, the cell and molecular engineering and all the material and all the cool stuff, but then the kids have to have like, you know, 130 credits. So then we start removing like, you know, calculus and stuff like that. Anyway, so that's just a
No, these are fantastic points. And actually, you bring up a very important point, which is even more than that. Not just do you know the methods, do you know where the methods came from? Do you have a sense of the history that predated that? And I mean, maybe I'll turn to you, Sean, because you, as a side, among your million other things you're doing, you have as a side project looking into the roots and history of AI. Maybe you can comment along those lines in terms of what value that has to this discussion, but broadly to the field and to the development of the next generation.
Definitely, and I think Gary, and who asked the question about what layer we need to look at, it's really at all the layers, and it becomes beyond what one person can do. And I think that making sure students are networking outside of their specialty area. You know, I stayed when I was in neuroscience, you know, when I was in grad school, I was in the amygdala subspecialty area at SFN, or I went to, you know, specialized amygdala conferences, but you really need to get out of that comfort zone and talk to people at multiple levels, or you're not going to be the person who can become a specialist at all the different levels. And so that human networking, and then the augmentation with the AI tools, keeping in mind that epistemologically, you know, optimizing towards the known, being able to have, you know, a program that recognizes something that is known, like a stop sign, is one thing, but being able to discern the unknown and build a bit of evidence is not what, you know, an optimization model is going to be good at. So we as humans have to figure out where it can be utilized appropriately, and we almost have to, like you know, boating against the wind, to put the right tack involved in getting that end result from both systems and organizations that we have, humans as individuals and as groups, and then the augmentation of the AI tools. But if you look back, as you were saying, Yoram, to the beginning of pre-AI, as I would call it, with cybernetics, there was a lot of integration of the biology and the medicine and the engineering coming out of World War II. Fortunately or unfortunately, fortunately because it accelerated things as fast as they have gone, but unfortunately because it really did narrow, as AI was named as you know, John McCarthy's marketing tool in 1956. He wanted only low-hanging fruit in engineering, and it has stayed that way for, you know, the better part of a century at this point. The reintegration of the science and the medicine, the biology, the medicine, and the engineering together is really what we're starting to see come up in an ad hoc way. And there are even starting to be some educational programs doing that. But I think more formally at the university level, at the business and corporation level, and especially at the government and the funding level and the policy level, we need to look and to bring those fields back together more than they have been, and not make everyone a generalist, but make sure generalists are interacting with all the specialty areas that they need to.
Yeah, that's terrific. Harinder, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, Gary put interesting question in the chat, and I responded to it, and I wanted to pick up on that. So first of all, I completely agree with Sean, and that in response to that question, that one needs to analyze something as complex as a biological system at various scales of hierarchical organization. And so that requires specialists and generalists, the specialists being those of us, you know, who are comfortable working at one scale of organization, for example, the cellular and molecular versus higher levels of organization, and the generalists trying to integrate across the various scales. I think one of the problems that we have in modern biology is that, and this comes out particularly when we are trying to integrate multi-omics data, is that we're not carefully recognizing which scales that those measurements are operating in. And as a consequence, it generates considerable confusion. And also, I think it impacts possible interpretation. So I would like to suggest that we hold each other accountable in terms of clearly articulating the levels of scale that we are operating at which those measurements apply or do not apply. And because I think that will help eventually to gain more, precise understanding of these very complex processes that we're hoping to understand.
So and these are fantastic points, and I know that you do a lot with students as well. In kind of your own environment, are you just trying to kind of convey these concepts sort of by association or osmosis, or is there a thought about how to do this in a more directed fashion?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. I guess, certainly you can imagine two ways, the more formal and somewhat didactic in the context of courses, and we certainly have a course, but the other is, basically a research forum that brings together people working across these different disciplines and having more extensive discussions in the context of a short presentation around these kinds of issues. And I think the more we do that with one another, in these less formal settings, hopefully that begins to take hold.
And hopefully, yeah, we are essentially modeling it for our trainees. Our level of interaction as colleagues, I don't mean just us, the two of us, since we're at the same institution, but I mean more broadly to the community, to model to our students the stepping out of comfort zones, the confronting of some of these questions, the questioning of, are we being led by methods or data sets versus are we thinking as scientists? I think modeling that to our trainees is probably as good as any approach. I mean, Edo, you do a lot with students, and you really spearheaded a lot of our student-centric approaches early on as we launched the journal. Do you have any thoughts in this
Yes,
regard?
well, I have a thought on what Harinder said, but also on what you said, we said before, and these things are somehow related. So I will start from what actually Harinder said. In most cases, we don't know why the data we have looks like they look. Because in the past, experiments in biology were pretty simple. They are very clever and pretty simple. Nowadays, we have this fantastic omics platform where we put a sample there and you got a table of numbers. And we know somehow the physics and the biochemistry underlying those the measurement process, but we don't know why the data have the structure they have. So, I mean, if you don't know how something works, it's really difficult to understand if something is wrong. That's what I try to say to the students. Then you have to think about what you see. If something doesn't make sense, probably it doesn't make sense. And this actually brings me to the other comment of Yoram. And they said that most students, but also I would say also scientists, they don't know why we are at the point we are now. So they don't know who has made which discovery. Well, of course, you know the bigger name, you know Galileo, you know Einstein, you know Fermi, but you don't know the great name in biology. They are mostly forgotten. I don't know why. I mean, in physics, not, but I'm a physicist by background. And this also actually, you said, what should you think? I think what should you teach to the student? We should teach them to think. Because in the past, people used to think more because they could do less. You don't have a computational approach. So before doing calculation, you really had to think hard and long because you could not afford to spend months or years doing calculation. So you need to find shortcuts, theoretical tricks. And the same for the experiment. I mean, we couldn't actually do all the experiment cheap like we do now. So now, as I said, you go, you make an experiment, it fails. Well, okay. But maybe this experiment 10 years ago or 20 years ago would cost 1 month of time. So we need to teach them a bit, maybe to work a bit in an old-fashioned way. Try to carefully design the experiment. That's, I think, something that actually could be of value for our students, the design of experiment.
Well,
Because-
and I mean, on the one hand, I mean, it's first of all, that's a great. In the past, you know, we used to think more because we could do less. I think that should be our T-shirt for the journal. So I want to get to a point you were saying that in the past the experiments were so much more costly. They may have taken more time, but I would argue nowadays with the need or the perceived need to have everything at a multi-omic description, a basic experiment becomes incredibly expensive if you have to actually do it out of pocket, right?
Probably.
So whereas before we said, hey, let's look at two molecules and you know, grow some cells. So now you need to measure 10 million molecules, and you need to do it in 20 different treatment conditions. And so that experiment, at the end of the day, though, is still only interrogating what cells are doing and doesn't tell you how the cells talk to other cells or how that whole thing comes together in a tissue or an organ. And yet, you know, we can be misled into believing that the measurement of lots of things in lots of cells is the same as an understanding of what's going on in a disease or something, right? So in some degree, it's almost like saying before our vehicles were very slow, so the likelihood of really driving them off a cliff at any given time was less. Now our vehicles are super fast. And so our likelihood of driving them either in the wrong direction really fast or off a cliff is almost higher. You know, not to put too negative of a point on this, but it's something to consider, right?
No, that's definitely true. I mean, if you look at the reproducibility crisis that you have in life science, it almost affects papers and studies in the last 20-25 years. So nobody's questioning studies published in the 50s or in the 60s. Probably they were more solid for some reason.
Well, it was harder to publish. I mean, we could talk about that entire issue as well. Our role as a journal and a publisher. I think we're going to come back to that because I think there's interest in hearing about that. But that's a fantastic, a fantastic point as well. Jennifer, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, just taking this in a slightly different direction. I mean, we're talking about training the next generation of students, and so to me, we have to think about what that generation is, and we know that, you know, I think some of this has been touched on in previous comments, that, you know, a generation that has, you know, grown up with computers and screens has not perhaps had to do a lot of the independent thinking that certainly our early scientific forefathers and foremothers had to do. But also it's a generation that has, in a way, a systems crisis. There's a mental health crisis. They have complete doubt in the systems that I think, you know, if we look at older generations, you know, didn't have that level of doubt. They doubt the climate, they doubt the political structure, they doubt the economic structure. And so I think one of the things that's really important for us to think about as educators, and of course, many educators just naturally do this, is who are these students coming in? Yes, we have to train them in science, and yes, we have to train them in all of the domain expertise areas that they have to have and get them networking. But we also, I think, can use systems biology and systems thinking to help them frame a world that they are really struggling to figure out. And, you know, we can do them a big service in that approach by really, you know, addressing the fundamental mindset issue that you raised, Yoram, in the very beginning of this journal is, you know, unfortunately, you know, when we think about the 20-somethings these days, they have a pretty negative mindset. And I think we can use our training, our experience, and the history, as Eduardo and others are talking about, to say, you know, actually, we've been here before, and we have tools to get us out of this, because what I see are kids, students this age coming in who don't believe that we have any hope really for that. So I think that's an important piece of this.
What I find has resonated, and I fully agree with everything you've said. What I find has resonated with students or trainees at different levels, and that has come out of some of the research topics we put forward. That, by the way, we kind of pioneered in this journal, and then were sort of rolled out throughout Frontiers. This was, and I want to give a special thanks to our journal manager Tom Collin, who's quietly behind the scenes here, but was my real partner in getting this going. I think what students are looking for, and I think what beyond that, if we all see ourselves as students at some level, is a kind of authenticity that is missing in what seems like a sales pitch for whether it's the latest AI or the latest omic, because the sales pitch is something like, oh, we don't know enough, we don't know anything, we need to get more X, and then that seems to be a foregone conclusion that when you get more X, you will know more, or you will be further along. And I think that the repeated cycles of finding out that either it's not based on anything true, or there's some nefarious intention underneath it, or it's certainly incomplete. I mean, I think having these kind of discussions and putting this in front of our students, trusting them to understand that, to say, hey, we don't know, we are trying, right? And we are trying to do it in the most organic and viable fashion, given the resource limitations we all have, starting with the resource lying between our ears, and then of course the resources available in our labs, etc. I think then at that point, then you can say, look, to touch on what Umar was saying before, these data sets that are out there now, they're a massive democratizing force potentially, because it means that a student with limited resources somewhere that, especially in say a developing nation that doesn't have the implicit infrastructure we all kind of have here on this panel, can dive right in with open source software and data sets that exist. And maybe this person has a curiosity and maybe a fantastic idea that they're not sure if anybody's thought of before. They tinker around with relatively limited resources and can convert this really expensive experiment that I was just talking about before into the world's best bang for the buck, because they did it with existing resources. But again, the key is giving them the structure and the lead and the wherewithal to become scientists in this environment, right? So yeah, Gary, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I really like this line of thinking, and I think part of the issue with respect to what Jennifer talked about is the expectation that there is going to be a definite answer, right? The uncertainty that is there is intrinsic to the fact that we live in a world in which we don't know everything, and we will never know everything, right? So I think this is also a problem with respect to how science, the reward system for science, right, which is predicated upon people becoming advocates for their particular method or their particular results in order to get the funding or the publicity or whatever, which leads to unrealistic expectations about what's going to actually be, delivered. I do mechanistic modeling. I think Shane has had this experience as well, in which there's an incredibly beneficial pedagogical effect of being forced to actually build something, right? Because it requires you to become familiar with the literature, examine what the knowledge landscape looks like, and recognize that it is incomplete. And it's inherently incomplete. But instead of trying to say, we want to have the final answer, the question is, what can we do useful with the information that we have at this moment, right? This goes to Gary's point a little bit with respect to, do you have to know everything and put everything into a particular model in order for that model to be useful for whatever purpose you intend for that particular model? So there's investigation for understanding, and we need to keep doing those sorts of things, recognizing that it may not be reproducible. It is a temporary hypothesis, et cetera, right? On the other hand, there are things that we kind of know and we trust, and then we determine whether or not they can be cast in a particular useful context that can then be evaluated to determine the trustworthiness of that particular thing. So I think that, there is almost a societal wish to believe in magic, right? To believe that there is some algorithm that will give you an ontological truth, right? That is going to provide some sort of, answer that will no longer cause you to have any doubt, which is obviously ridiculous. But I think, unfortunately, the nature of the discourse around some of these tools occurs with that particular tone, which needs to be strongly resisted.
But in essence, Gary, kind of brings us around to this question of ethics. I mean, ethics and science in general is a gigantic and thorny question. But this idea of, is a properly constructed model, you know, whether that's a mechanistic model or a data-driven framework, is it kind of an arbiter of truth, right? Like, is this idea of making people have to say, especially some of our colleagues, clinical colleagues, biology colleagues that are more trained in the more typical reductionist methodology, which again, I'm trying to make it clear, especially younger members of our audience or whoever will be viewing this eventually afterwards. That wasn't the way it always was, right? It's the way we have. This is where we've come to, but after 40 years of somewhat purposeful effort to drive funding and research in that direction, right? Digging super deep into pathways, et cetera, versus having a broad generalist approach. And again, the people that drove for that themselves were generalists. So the idea was that they probably thought, we got this covered, now let's work on the details. The problem is that 40 years later, that background is gone, right? And in a sense, we're left to pick up the pieces and reintegrate them. And in fact, one could even raise the interesting hypothesis that maybe some of this new generative AI is the new generalism, right? Because it's if you have a lot of pieces lying on the floor after you broke Humpty Dumpty, and you have to put this Humpty Dumpty back together, you might just need a pure machine learning framework to try to look through the pieces and try to figure things out, maybe in a new way, who knows? But let's come back to this ethics idea, because, you know, Gary, you know, suffusing your comments was this idea that behind the scenes, we should kind of do no harm, and from a biology context, right? We should be at least doing that. Ideally, we should be doing good. And yet, all of these misincentivized efforts probably drive towards bad outcomes, bad faith, bad, you know, bad sort of actors in the field.
I don't want to get into the issue of fraud, right? Because there are always going to be bad actors out there. My comment is related to the general incentive structure that's out there and the tendency in society of seeming to be able to have a ontological truth, right? And the inability of people in general to deal with uncertainty, right? Particularly if it's coming from a scientific arena, which is ridiculous because people deal with uncertainty in their daily lives all the time, right? So I think that there is a disconnect between what people expect from quote unquote science and how they operationalize that intersection with their daily lives.
No. So, I mean, I was trying to get at that. So does systems biology and some of the approaches we have, does it make the problem worse, or do we have methodologies and approaches that can make it better or try to solve it?
I think that without being completely pejorative, certain approaches from the machine learning side that claim to be able to generate some sort of magical insight into a complex data set, when in actuality, what they're doing is they're generating hypotheses that need to be tested, right? I think that there are practitioners in those particular fields that overpromise what they can actually do. This goes back to the issue of understanding what the limitations of our particular methods are. There should be no disconnect between AI, machine learning, and mechanistic modeling. They are different, complementary portions of the scientific cycle by which you make observations, you analyze the data, you come up with a hypothesis, and then you figure out a way to test those particular hypotheses to determine whether or not they are applicable to your particular context. They are not, but one can't overwhelm the other, right? The two need to work in a complementary fashion. And let me just anticipate this. Generative AI is no different, right? Generative AI is just generating more data using a sufficiently trained neural network to reproduce things that were used to train it. So I think that these are complementary methods, right, that can be utilized to enhance the overall scientific output. But sometimes there's a belief that it's magic, right? And it is not magic.
Of course. Yeah, Janet, you've been waiting patiently.
Yeah, no, thank you. Actually, I want to bring a slightly different kind of question, but I think it ties into the issue of ethics that you raised about. And my point is that obviously there's going to be like, lots of models, lots of approaches. That's what we're discussing, and lots of data. But I think especially if we're gonna be thinking in terms of translational something, at some point, sooner or later, these models will need to have regulatory approval. And I just want to share it with you, because I'm involved in a lot of activities in the field of systems pharmacology. And like the FDA is actually really trying to figure out, once we move away from kind of established models where we know the data goes in and we know what the model looks like, and then we start getting into the basically the infinite complexity of models and approach and so on and so forth, how do we know what we get? And I think it does also relate to ethics as we start getting to the point where I think we would all like to have these models make actually impactful decisions and not remain at the level of, basic science. I have a complex, signaling network, and here I developed a nice model. The question is, if I'm going to use this model now to impact treatment and monitor a patient. So I think that's something that also needs to be factored in, not to limit innovation. That's not what I mean. But I think, as we, translate these models to being directly applicable to a patient, that's something that will come about.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're challenged with is that things are happening at the different levels, and not everybody understands that. And that's not just at the biological levels, but you see things like GPT and Microsoft Research. I'm not picking on them, but a lot of people have done this. They trained GPT on all of the PubMed abstracts that were out there, and it was BioGPT, and it seemed like a good approach. But if you've ever done systematic review or meta-analysis or been part of a clinical practice guidelines, these are not one-to-one things. Not only are they only sub-representative of what's in the paper, but the paper needs to be evaluated to whether you would weight that at 1 or you'd weight that at a 0.1. And if you're not weighting the data, then you're comparing apples and oranges, and you're really throwing ingredients into the pie that no one wants to eat. And so I think that being able to understand the systems that are at play and make sure you have safeguards and checks and generals to understand it across the board is going to be more and more important, going back to the education aspect that we said. But also we've got tools that allow us to deal with more data, but the data they're dealing with is messy, unvalidated, comes from different sources. We don't know where it came from. It's like we're trying to create gourmet meals by diving in a dumpster. It's just not viable. We really need to do better at knowing what the data quality stratification is, and that making more data available and really continuing to centralize data is becoming more expensive, more risky, especially with regard to people's personal health information. And so approaching things much more and moving the compute to the data instead of moving the data into a centralized place is probably another approach to smoothing out some of the ethical challenges that we are going to continue seeing, which more often than not are less about outright fraud and more often about just speed or not knowing all the details and moving towards something that's an incomplete result, and then trying to implement that result because of the incentivization structure that's product market fit and always moving forward. So I think looking again at that systems level, looking at the regulatory, as people have said, but honestly, the regulators are scratching their heads and falling behind as well. And so figuring out how we get some of the best and brightest to be thinking about the regulatory challenges so that can get ahead of the curve of what the both science and business side are doing with these new tools, I think is going to be very important.
So actually, you made me think about something, and maybe I can call on Umar for this because he brought it up originally. Is that so? Is there a role? So when data get deposited, right? They're repositories and they have formats, but this whole question of data quality is almost never, at least in my experience, brought up, right? As long as the format and the platform that was used, et cetera, there's an implicit thought that behind it all, it's all of good quality, right? But I mean, nobody says your data need to cover X number of time points, and nobody says your data need to cover X number of individuals, and nobody says your data need to cover, both sexes, and or if you're looking at microbes, whatever the, and I apologize, but maybe you can chime in with microbe specific, requirements. Is there a role, well, either at the journal level or at the funder level or at whatever level you might think, for the data quality aspect of it? Because this is a fundamental issue, right? And if we continue to deposit data, right, thinking, well, we're fulfilling the requirement, but the data are just, I have all the issues, Sean, you just described, are we really helping this, right? We're not helping ourselves. I don't know, have you thought about this at all, Umar? Or?
Yeah, so in terms of like I have developed a software in my lab where we also look at PubMed abstracts and other sources of data and then try to infer uh, um, something useful out of it in terms of microbiology. I think the problem was that the data that was deposited initially, as whenever there was the sequencing boom, it was very unstructured. Not only it was very unstructured, there was no way to consolidate all of that information together. But now with structure coming into play where you are isolating your data from and geographical coordinates and all these, we are heading there. We are not there yet, but we are heading there. I think the second problem with biological data is that it is typically, each study is, unless it is well funded, undersampled. And because it is undersampled with and there are a lot of when you start integrating all of those sample studies together to find a global perspective, you start to realize that some of the original findings may be controversial because we have inferred something based on very little data that is available there. The third thing is I agree with Sean there. I think eventually it will all come down to which data we do not want to use. I think that sifting through the data and then trying to get rid of the data that will skew our observation is going to be a very challenging issue.
Should that be done at the front end rather than forcing people like you or students of Shane's or someone else to have to figure out what value the data have for them when they're trying to just go forward? Because they go to a repository, the repository is an official one, it's approved, it's blessed, it's funded, and so they make an assumption about what they're getting from that repository. The question is, should the systems biologists actually have something to say about what and how is in those repositories?
I think there's a degree of manual work involved in all of this. I think the best thing we can do is we can define inclusion exclusion criteria, or we can sort of like in terms of data usage, we can tag whether this data has a bit of veracity or something like other kind of index there. But the way, I mean, I mean, although so much has been done in terms of system biology and all that, we are still relying on manual intervention to sift out study that we think there's maybe something wrong with them, or and then rest of the data we then check it in our algorithms and other tools that we develop. It is very difficult it is very difficult to establish the correctness of our data um, unless there is enough evidence that is built over the years which uses the same data over and over again um, to suggest some kind of a qualitative or a quantitative measure. But it's very hard these days. Um, So that is
But arguably harder than ever because there's more repositories than ever and more data than ever. And that's, yeah, I mean, definitely a food for thought.
I think the system biology has developed to a point at which it really need to make a cross with mathematics and statistics. So we handle very complex system in which numerous factors play a role together. So without mathematics modeling, it's very difficult to identify the internal working and hidden pattern in the big data set. So I ask myself how we can develop a powerful mathematical model for understanding the interaction for complex system. So I would think in nature, nonlinear interaction is quite universal. Most model we use now are based on linear regression. I think this is not enough to study complex system. And secondly, so data has too much noise, as everybody point out. So how we can analyze such data with a huge amount of noise? So it's quite challenging. So we may integrate advanced statistic and a mathematical model like nonlinear filter into the data modeling process. So at this, so we can pretty much able to handle the noise problem in data. So I would suggest our education system has more components in mathematics and statistics. So most problem currently, most biologists do not understand mathematics well. They may use computer software, but they don't know how the software develop it and what is underpins of the software. So only a user can better understand the fundamental foundation of software or methods that can get more good results, and that can better interpret the results. So my suggestion is our journal may have a special issue on the mathematical or statistical modeling of complex system related to complex system biology. I agree with you, Roya. You say the biologist is going to every biology going to system biology. So I cannot agree with you more. Biology is always complicated. There are lots of factors. So we really need just good model, good methods to handle such a complex system.
I appreciate that, in a fantastic point. As we're heading close to the time of wrapping up the webinar, I just wanted to be able to get maybe some closure, if you will, even though we won't. I'm hoping this will be actually a series of webinars that we will do with sporadically, so that we can continue to tackle these big questions. Harinder, you had your hand up as well.
I just wanted to make a quick point, a very rough analogy. Physics went through an extraordinary phase, and there was a lot of creative tension between experimental physicists and theoretical physicists. And at times, and someone might argue that we are in a time where string theorists, as the theorists have kind of gotten away from the experimental side. The analogy for us at this point would be, reductionist biologists up against AI and generative intelligence in particular. And there's a creative tension that's playing out, which in some ways is analogous to what physics went through. I think it's good for modern biology, and systems biology obviously is going to be at the forefront in terms of seeing how this creative tension plays out.
Yeah, that's I think I couldn't agree more. Does anyone else have any thoughts along those lines in terms of, bigger picture view of kind of where things are going in systems biology and what our role or emphasis might be in that regard? Sean, you have your hand up.
This is gonna perhaps sound a little bit provocative, but as someone mentioned it earlier in our discussions of good science, bad science, fraud, incentives, there's is there more bad science coming to light now because we have tools that are finding it? Yes, there's people who are running image searches on old studies. There's probably a lot of mess and a lot of noise that we've overlooked as science over decades has scaled up rapidly. Figuring out a way to not only use the tools that we have beyond imaging to go back through that, but also figuring out how to deal with that on a social level. Outright fraud aside, are there practices in the past that led to a noisier system than we should have now? And as we come to light, are people going to be fighting that, pushing back against that? And there's almost like an amnesty approach that I think we need to look at and figure out from a societal system, because when you've got Alzheimer's, all of a sudden we've got 20 years of not only the research following bad science, but the funding decisions following bad science. People at institutions that are funding these things are going to circle the wagons and not want to admit that there's a problem and be hesitant to look for other problems. But to clean up the science and to make it better in the future, finding ways of saying, okay, we have better tools now, we can dive into this, let's improve things. And to improve things, it's gonna bring some of the mess to the forefront. That's going to be challenging. And even at an overall science level, I used to get yelled at when I was a grad student, when I would bring up in front of Congress, because we go down and we have our lobbying days, that we can do better. And I was told, don't bring up any of our dirty laundry in front of Congress, they'll cut our funding. And I was like, well, we need to do better then. And I think that's a constant challenge scientists have, is they don't want to air their dirty laundry because they think their funding is going to get cut. But at some point, it should be cut if we can't clean it up.
Very good points. Yeah, as I think through all of this, I think what I'm taking away, what I have taken away is, number one, whether we want to or not, we are sitting at the intersection now of multiple different paths that have rapidly risen to the attention of even the general public, right? Because a lot of what is hitting the news is at the intersection of computing and biology, one way or another, right? Sometimes very directly, and sometimes indirectly. COVID, I think, really brought it to the attention of the general public, both the successes and the failures, right? And a lot of that manifested in a big way because of the fact that it was, a very heavily systems-oriented approach to try to deal with it, whether it was pandemic, forecasting and modeling for that, or whether it was modeling the immune responses, or if it was just trying to figure out from the data what could be discerned to drive novel therapies. And any success or failure of that played out in real time. And so the hope that I have is that we will continue to step up to the plate and deal with the challenge, because, and especially in this journal, we are fundamentally interested in doing that, and not just simply sticking to our silos. I mean, the silo gives you an out. Oh, I don't work on that. That's not my method, right? So then, of course, you automatically have a way to avoid the problem. But when you put yourself in the place that says, no, we are the Venn diagram overlap. Our goal is to be the ones that integrate. Then it's hard to step away from that. There isn't really a silo to hide in if we're trying to bridge across the silos. And so I'm hopeful that will be the impact that this journal and the conversations that I hope we can spark in the webinars like this one will help drive, right? And again, only because of the wonderful thoughts and opinions and interaction that you all have brought to this. My hope is then that we will be able to continue doing these with some regularity. We have a very large number of questions that and large high-level topics that we did not get to discuss. I want to thank the contributions from the webinar attendees. I know that some of your questions were answered live by our panelists. I hope that you found the discussion to be of value as well, and hope that you will be able to join us in future webinars. And so at this point, I'd like to just kind of say again, thanks, a big round of thanks to all of you and all of the participants. Again, to the journal team, Tom and Katie, who was also behind the scenes quietly helping make sure this all works. And hope to see you on the next one of these webinars. And in the meantime, I invite you to look at our articles at Frontiers in Systems Biology. Again, thank you all very, very much.